Good evening, everyone. I'm Octavian Badescu, economist, entrepreneur, and producer of this program, Economy for All, hosted by our friends from Global News, a program in which we do apolitical economical education for all people, including political leaders, regardless of doctrinal claim or country. The messages I received from you revealed my interest in talking more and more about money. You want to understand exactly what it is. I urge you to watch and rewatch the other editions of the program. You will understand even better. My YouTube channel is at your disposal. Subscribe and don't forget not to keep the information to yourself. Pass the knowledge on, as this is the only way we can hope to bring about or influence change in a system that has been wrongly architectured and unreformed for far too long. A system that is obviously moving towards a dystopian, quasi-slavery world. Today, in the 9th edition of this program, we are going to talk again, but even more applied, about money, about the blood that irrigates the economic system, because it is decisive in the economy. We all use it every day, but few know where it comes from, what it is, and especially what it should be, and unfortunately, it is not. Today, we dive into the history and then back to the present. We hope that at the end of the program, which I hope you will consider a benchmark, all those who have watched it will have a deep understanding of what money is, what government, the state, has done to our money, to recall the title of a Rothbard book, and what people should do about it, if they want to, of course. After all, freedom, it is an option. The history of the evolution of money is fascinating and spans thousands of years, reflecting the economic and the social development of human civilization. From primitive forms of exchange to today's complex financial systems, money has evolved significantly. That's pretty much what it says in the textbook, and it's true. What is not said in the textbook is how this evolution of money has been coincided with an involution of freedom of individuals. Let's make together a short foray into history, slicing the elephant, pointing out not only the stages of evolution, but also the essential, decisive aspects that probably no one has pointed out for you so far. First of all, humans realized the importance of what we call division of labor and exchange, two very important concepts in making efficient use of resources. I will write it down. Division of labor, one concept, and exchange, two decisive concepts. Okay, so basically, in the same time of a day, that is 1,440 minutes. If one or more people use their 1,440 minutes differently and complementarily, sharing their task, they will achieve more in the 4,320 cumulative minutes for 3 persons than if each person makes a spare hounds, build a fire, skin, sleeps in his own law, so on and so on. They came to a conclusion and a way of working that today we call Voluntary cooperation, another important concept. I will write it down. Voluntary cooperation. The main source of progress along with innovative processes and so on. So, that is, in a day, everyone can meet their own needs with a minimum consumption of natural resources and time, because one fire and one boar was enough for 3 people, and it was better that while one was hunting, the other was preparing the firewood and making the fire, while the third was guarding the hut. The one who was hunting would share the boar with the other 2, depending on how they understood each other, as he couldn't eat it all anyway. And he didn't have a fridge, the surplus would have spoiled anyway. In early societies, up until 5,000 years ago, the exchange of goods and services was practically called barter. Barter, I will write it down. The first step, practically, of the exchange was through barter. Okay. Barter. Okay, so this system did not involve money. Instead, people directly exchange goods or services of equivalent value. Give me 10 applies of a fire or a night's shelter in the hut, and I will give you a pork leg. Barter, which cannot exist if there is no production over consumption, was still inefficient because it required the coincidence of needs, like both participants had to want exactly what the other was offering at that time. And the value of goods was harder to establish, hard to reach a bilaterally agreed common denominator. Then, by about 1,000 years before Christ, in order to overcome the limitation of barter, societies began to use commodities of intrinsic value as means of exchange. They used salt, grain, cattle, shields, precious metals, and other object resources universally recognized as having value. Here we are talking about a fourth and a fifth very important concepts, that of the resource and value. I will not write it down this time because I want to outline the history of money here, but resource and value, there are other important concepts. What is the value of the resource? What determines it? The value of a resource has 3 logically intuitive characteristics. Its usefulness, probably its indispensability for as many people as possible, so that it has the capacity to be exchanged, its resistance over time, and its transportability in space, also for these capacities of use and exchange, so exchange capacity that transform them into commodities, the 5th important notion. So, parenthesis, we emphasize, as we have done in other previous broadcasts, this indispensable function of a mark in order to be able to acquire the characteristics of money. So I am talking about value preservation. A function which today is no longer fulfilled. Hence, we are now working with what I called pseudo-money. We close the parenthesis. As an example, in the cold areas of the north, furs were used as an instrument of exchange. In Mesopotamia, today's Near East, Syria, they used barley as currency. In Africa, they used shells. In ancient Rome, they originally used salt as an unit of exchange, as a ban. Hence, the word wage. It's practically from salarium, from salt. Of course, all goods were measured in quantities, weights, so on. So divisibility and the uniformity were also important as characteristics of the instruments of exchange, which later favored the emergence of coins. I will write here, so this is barter, then it's commodities. Now it's coins. Okay, so while we are on the subject of Mesopotamia, the earliest forms of banking also originated in Mesopotamia, where temples and palaces function as centers for storage and lending. The first coins appeared in Mesopotamia. People would store their surplus grain or other valuables in the temples, and the priests or rulers would, in return, give them a certificate of deposit and lend money also in commodities, including livestock, for example, charging interest, also expressed in the amount of the commodity, and playing a crucial role in the development of agriculture and trade. And when they lend, they could only lend what they had for as long as they had it, unlike the current practice of banks, which simply invent monetary resources, including without hedging in existing surpluses, but only possibly in the future, for which they charge interest. Sometimes loans were given in exchange for a labor commitment. This means that the borrower promised to repay the loan in kind, so that the borrower promised to offer their labor, skills, abilities, competencies for a measurable period of time in lieu of a loaned asset. So here it is, dear followers, the first recognition of time as a commodity, and the first use it as a currency, as money, as instrument of exchange and means of payment, over 3,000 years ago. After the show, have a look at the www.minutesbank.com, and if you want, make free of charge an account there, not only to find out how many minutes you have spent so far on Earth, but also to be recognized again after thousands of years, time as a currency in an innovative, modern, technologized, and most importantly, correctly architectured form on economic and monetary perspective. And then you can also engage in exchanges with other users, using your balances as a complementary currency, so-called, instantly transferable and commission-free. So please note that all these resources used in a period as money were produced by individuals, not centralized by the state, by any central bank, which gave each individual the ability to generate currency, using his time and natural resources that he could obtain and possibly process, transform with his own time, within the limit of his own time and the existing raw or transformed natural resources, such as spears. So, three more important notions to remember, which are at the same time resources or factors of production: time, raw natural resources transformed with time, so-called capital. You will recall that we have already talked about the first program, not by chance. If the individual has the capacity to use nature for self-consumption and to generate both reserve and tool resources of exchange, it means that the individual has individual freedom. Very important, all these notions. Self-consumptions, reserves, exchange tools, and of course, freedom. Only the reserves, the surpluses, can be exchanged for other people's reserves. So we can say that money can only be what, or the representation of what, remains after self-consumption. Very important. So here we can put, why not, also an ad hoc definition of freedom. Freedom is the ability of the individual to use his own time and his proportionate share of raw nature for self-consumption of natural resources, for transformation, and to realize reserves, which he can consume in the future or use as an instrument of exchange. This is the definition of freedom in the vision of the speaker, Octavian Badescu. The third stage in this evolution of money is the one related to the appearance of metallic coins, as I wrote it here. The third stage, metallic coins has appeared roughly plus minus about 500, 1,000 years before and after the birth of Christ. The emergence of the first coin was in China and India, was therefore a gradual process and responded to the need to improve the efficiency of economic exchange in a growing society. The first coins were made of precious metals such as gold and silver and bore the seal of the issuing authorities, guaranteeing their weight and value. They were first created in a state organization in the area of modern-day Turkey. These coins were made of electron, a natural mixture of gold and silver, and were stamped with symbols to indicate the value guaranteed by the state. So, the coins were made and issued by rulers, the state, mainly to facilitate trade, legitimize political authority, and simplify administration and tax collection. But people's freedom was greatly reduced, and they were no longer in a position to generate their own instrument of exchange, becoming, as a result, dependent. The state controlled the coin production process to ensure standardization and trust in the monetary system, which was crucial to the success and adoption of this new medium of exchange. Thus emerged in ancient Greek the drachma, which was originally a unit of measure for a weight, and in the Roman Empire the denarius, the standard currency of the empire. In the beginning, a denarius, which comes from 10, weighed about 4.5 grams of pure silver and was equivalent to 10 bronze aces, reflecting its value relative to other coins in circulation at the time. As a process, the state introduced the coins into the economy by paying soldiers, civil servants, and other workers, who then bought resources with them and by purchasing resources from the merchants. By collecting taxes, some of the coins went back to the state, which put them back into circulation. Gold and silver were chosen because of their characteristics. They were durable, easy to transport, could be divided into smaller units without losing their value and were universally recognized and appreciated for their beauty and rarity. So they had intrinsic value, being alternatively used in the jewelry industry, for example, and still were a commodity, being tradable. To ensure confidence in coins, state authorities, king, empire, began to issue and regulate coins, stamping them with the symbols, images, and effigies representing political power, including their own image, guaranteeing the standard weight and the purity of each coin. Currencies enabled faster transactions, reduced exchange cost, and eliminated uncertainty in the value of goods. They have also become symbols of sovereignty and power, were used to reinforce national identity and demonstrate political authority, facilitated the expansions of trade, and allowed economies to grow beyond the confines of the local communities. This increased international trade and interconnected economies. Coins played a crucial role in the expansion of empires, allowing governments to collect taxes, pay armies, and administer large territories. But a crucial moment in the history of mankind, after that of the reduction of freedom through the loss of the capacity of individual generation of the instrument of exchange, coins could be and were devaluated. Devaluated by multiplication. The practice of diluting coins, also known as devaluation, was first used in documented form by Roman emperors. That's it as today by political leaders. The practice was used to increase the number of coins in circulation and, by extension, to fund government spending, such as paying soldiers, maintaining the administration, and other costs associated with maintaining the empire, with Nero being remembered as, by history as the first Roman emperor in the 1st century after Christ to systematically begin to dilute the silver content of the denarius, the main currency of the Roman Empire, Nero. Nero reduced the silver content of the denarius from 94% to 85%, replacing the rest with less precious metals such as copper. This devaluation allowed Nero to create more coins from the same amount of silver, allowing the government to finance larger expenditures without having to raise taxes or cut spending. Sounds familiar? Have political leaders healed by now? Have they evolved? No way. On the contrary. After Nero, many other Roman emperors continued to dilute coins to cope with various critical moments for them. 2 centuries later, the silver content of the denarius dropped to 50%, and after another few decades, the silver content of the denarius dropped to less than 5%, effectively turning silver coins into copper coins with a shallow layer of silver. Currency devaluation was and still is very good for the rulers and very harmful for the people, for the ruled, especially for those who were in the last to get possession of the newly issued quantities. Why is this happening? Think about the phenomenon. Resources are limited, okay? As I explained in the first program, there is one Earth and there are a number of people who populate it with their also limited stock of time. So in a given period of time, humans and nature have a limited productive capacity, which, in the absence of innovation, may increase very little from one year to the next. On the other hand, humans consume as much as they consume. They can't each eat a ton of meat a year. They can't live in 10 houses and so on. So the quantity of goods and services in the economy can only increase if, on one hand, people consume more, and on the other hand, make goods that last over time. If they waste resources, for example, if hunters hunted more than the needs of the community, they were wasting energy, risking, destroying future food resources, and the price of furs would go down as they would no longer be needed and valuable. At that time, the question of the need to create jobs was not as important as it is very wise now today. Of course, some goods and services leave the economy through wear and tear, through consumption. Others enter. So, if we assume that the population engaged in the production remains constant, the quantity of goods increased only by the difference between the new quantity produced in that year and the used quantity produced in that year, relative to the existing quantity of goods. So, only a few percent per year, certainly less than 5%, probably 2.5–3%, as much as 1 year's population duration is in the total stock over time, which is the weighted average age multiplied by the population, grosso modo, more or less. Maybe even less in today's world, where products are not only for subsistence and immediate consumption. If a certain point in the economy there is a certain amount of surplus resource and a certain amount of currency, also a resource, prices are formed depending on supply and demand for each element of the surplus, including the currency. One coin may be worth 10 kilos of wheat, not just 1 kilo of wheat worth 10 parts of the coin. If, at some point in the future, a significantly larger quantity of currency emerge in the economy than the surplus quantity of the other resources, the currency will devaluate relative to other commodities, especially if the latter have a higher perceived utility. So, we say that pricing are rising because we have been propagandistically educated and accustomed to it, but in fact, the value of the currency is being lowered by the one who multiplies it at a rapid pace. As an example, let's briefly plunge into an unfortunate Romanian, let's say, present, where in only last 17 years, the money supply of lei has increased from 106 to 690 billion. That's it, it has multiplied almost 7 times, with an average rate of about 11.5% per year. That is 1% per month. I think it is obvious that to you that the surpluses in the Romanian economy could not physically have grown by so much just during this period. If the multiplication would have had a rate of only 2.53% annually, the total money supply would have reached only 173 billion lei, and its influence on prices would probably not have been felt. Not to mention the fact that only in 3 recent years, between 2020 and 2022 inclusive, the money supply increased from 419 to 603 billion, so 44% in 3 years. That's the inflation rate. That's how much our economies have been devaluated, not just our own, and its incomes has not kept pace. Concomitantly, we are still impoverishing by being forced to accept to use the state's currency for people-to-people exchanges. Thus, we are permanently forced to give our time, our lives to others. Coming back, this practice of devaluation, although it allowed the Roman Empire to cover its expenses in short term, in the long term, led to a significantly loss of confidence in the Roman currency, which contributed to runaway inflation and the economic destabilization of the Roman Empire. Eventually, along with migration, there were only 10% Romans left in Rome at one point, the rest being all sorts of barbarians. So inflation, along with migration, being the cause of its breakup, of the Roman Empire breakup. Notice to the European Union and member states. Devaluation harm those who have been useful to others and have consumed less in the past because it devaluates the value of money that have saved, forcing them to give up finite resources, natural capital or time in order to survive. In short, it represents an intolerable in a society that claims to be civilized theft of time, and those who practice it can be called nothing else than thieves, counterfeiters who remain unpunished in this evolved society, but even respected and followed, regarded as experts of theft and manipulation, I would say, as an effect of statist propaganda and, unfortunately, of collective ignorance, propaganda and ignorance against which you can fight together with me by distributing knowledge. Share. Another category of victims are those who come last into possession of the new money issued. For example, those with fixed incomes from pensions, salaries, and or annuities. They will find the prices of the desired resources already driven up by the demand that those who first come into the possession of the newly generated money are driving. That's it. That is real estate developers, owner of shares, employees of the state and of the large companies working with the state, multinational accessing large loans on more favorable terms, and their employees and shareholders, employees and suppliers of banks. In economics, this effect, non-uniform with arbitrary losers and arbitrary winners, was also emphasized by the economist Richard Cantillon, nicknamed the father of political economy 300 years ago. I can't help out also pointing out that he was one of the first economists to pay attention to the role of entrepreneur in economist. He described entrepreneurship as the willing to take risk, and entrepreneurs are willing to make investments without the guarantee of success. And this is a central idea in the modern entrepreneurship theory. Anyway, the ultra-modern entrepreneurship turns out to be the kind with money from the state or the EU, for example, taxing taxpayers through direct or throughout inflation. Back to the grave Cantillon. Therefore, this is how social polarization emerged. This is its determinant factor, and this is how the road to total control of a deprived majority of the population is being built. This is why reforms and alternatives in the monetary banking field are imperative, simply to save our reserves and our freedom. No more, no less. Banknotes, the fourth stage in the evolution of money, emerge as a practical solution to the need to transport and transact large sums of money more efficiently than using coins. So, banknotes. Banknotes. Notes of the bank. So, they were lighter, took up less space, and were therefore easier to transport. Banknotes were originally certificates of deposit. Banknotes, hence the name, issued by banks which represented a sum of gold or silver coins safely deposited in the banks. Merchants and private banks began to issue certificates of deposit that depositors could use as a means of payment instead of carrying heavy metal coins. That is, you went with 10 ounce of gold coins deposited in there, and the banker gave you a paper certifying that the person in possession of the paper could withdraw the amount from the bank. The world's first banknotes were issued in China about 1,500 years ago. Then the Chinese government, the head of the state, eventually took control of banknote issuance, standardizing and regulating the process against the state. In Europe, the first modern banknotes were not issued in Sweden until 1661 by Stockholm Banco. Banknotes represented a certain value of coins, usually gold or silver, deposited in the bank. Then, decades later, came North America, with colonial governments issuing banknotes. The multiplication of uncovered banknotes, like the issue of banknotes without an exact match in stored precious metal, began when banks and governments realized that they could issue more banknotes than the amount of gold or silver they actually held. This phenomenon was an early form of what we today call fiat money and fractional reserve banking. Note that the first hyperinflation occurred just a few years after the French Revolution, when the new revolutionary government filled the market with papers. It was called the insurance crisis, which was followed by large riots. Hyperinflation solved by Napoleon Bonaparte after about 10 years ago, 10 years after, by introducing a new currency, the franc, defined as equal to 5 grams of pure silver, a model of stability for a century and a half. In retrospect, banks began to realize that in practice, the depositors were not always redrawing the full quantity, the full amount of precious metal on deposit. So banks started to issue banknotes in excess of the total value of precious metal deposits, keeping only a fraction of the value in reserve. In today's world, it's less than 10-15%, even 1%, so 10 times more. Those are the limits in today's so-called modern world, where your money deposited in banks, which you are forced to work with, no longer belongs to you, can be blocked at any time, and is devalued and risked. And that's because Citizens do not understand, nor are they helped to do so, on the contrary, how much harm they do to themselves by tolerating. They have been really indoctrinated with pseudoscience, with pseudo-economics. So, this system allowed banks to extend credit and finance more economic activities, some just wasteful of labor and natural resource, but also introduced the risk of massive withdrawals, bank runs, if all depositors simultaneously demanded the conversion of the banknotes into precious metal. Lending without backing in saved resources, another nodal point in history. The first bankers to practice fractional reserve banking were the gold bankers in Europe, especially in England and Italy, starting in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, so about 400-500 years ago. Thus, since then, in addition to the devaluation generated by the state management, there was added the devaluation by multiplication generated by the banks. Nowadays, the problem has become more acute. The man comes and deposits now 10,000 euro at sight, and the bank gives a loan of 9,000 euro or even now 9,900 euro after 2008 for 20 years. Money that remains in the economy even when you take out your saved money and buy something with it. And that invented money competes with the real money and makes prices to go up. In addition, the next bank where the 9,000 euro ends up will be able to keep 900 of it, or 90, and it will be granted another 8,100 or more loan for another 20 years. The idea is that from the 10,000 euro real savings, 100,000 euro can be generated in the economy. Take after 2008, even 1 million euro can be generated. After 1% reserves, what can follow? 0.1% or some financial reset? Read decapitalization of the population? Rising prices, unprofitable investments, crises, defaulted loans, withdrawals, and more money will be introduced into the economic system, plus the personal and family tragedies and human casualties. Obviously, we agree with the characterization of academician Angel Rugina, the Romanian academician, who calls it an imbalanced banking system. Yet, we still exist and call ourselves an evolved modern society. Fifth stage, the area of expansion and generalization of fiat money. During, let's call here, fifth, fiat money. I hope you can see it. Yes, you still can. So, 1, barter. 2, commodities. 3, coins. 4, banknotes. 5, fiat money. The history of money and the history of from freedom to serfdom. So, during World War I, many countries suspended the gold standard in order to finance the war efforts by printing money without full coverage. By 1930, under the pretext of solving the financial crisis, Roosevelt forced his citizens to hand over their gold to the state, to a central bank, created after many disputes with casualties only in 1913, to hand it over in exchange for paper money. Americans were forbidden to hold gold until until 1974. As we argue, the American administration, the land of freedom, right, took another decisive steps towards modern slavery. A fourth key moment in the history of money is to effectively steal people's real wealth and alternatives to the flawed statist instrument of exchange. In the 1960s, French President Charles de Gaulle was one of the most vocal critics of the post-World War II system of US dollar hegemony, whereby the Americans guaranteed that for every $35, countries holding gold reserve in the US could receive back 1 ounce of gold. In protest at what he saw as a gold glut in the global financial system, de Gaulle ordered the Central Bank of France to exchange some of its dollar reserve for gold and repatriate the gold held in the US. As a result, a significant amount of gold was returned to France before 1971. And in 1971, the United States, under President Richard Nixon, with the trump cards of military might and under pressure from countries that had held their gold stored in America and wanted it redeemed against American multiplied dollars, completely abandoned dollar convertibility into gold, making the official end of the gold standard globally. The fifth turning point, an inflection point in the history of money. They basically took real money from other countries who opted to keep most of it with gold in American custody, and the paper money called dollars gradually devaluating in their own savings. But the repatriation trend has started, and this is a good part of the present, but Romania has not joined it, keeping its gold outside of the country, in London as far as we know. Perhaps we should remember an old Romanian saying, if you give, you have not, don't give, you will see how you can have. After 1971, with the end of dollar convertibility into gold, this marked the beginning of a new global economic era based on fiat money and floating currency markets. This led to significant changes in the way countries manage their gold reserves and monetary policy. This decision turned all major currency into fiat money. So money is no longer backed by a reserve of precious metal and no intrinsic value, all the more so as it is now increasingly in electronic form, but is backed by the faith in the issuing government. This has allowed governments and central banks to issue money according to the needs of the economy, but it has generalized inflation and devaluation, so decapitalization, impoverishment of the majorities of families of the population, obviously on a rat's wheel, which is spinning at an ever-increasing speed with extremely negative effects. Nowadays, we are quite impassively witnessing the sixth decisive moment, another stage of the attack on the property and freedom, the attack on cash money, on so-called income and holdings that are too high or those origin you cannot prove, and the road to a single controlled global currency whose issuer will come to control without borders everything that is most valuable on earth. 3 in 1. We are getting freer and freer, aren't we? How did we get here? The explanation is simple. Gradually, pan-generational, without realizing, according to the principle of boiling the frog and similar to the evolution of cataracts. it has taken from us, it was taken from us and we lost on the spur of the moment. It is being taken from us in stages, segmented according to the limit of tolerance of each of us, until the moment when we will no longer have resources to react. Or not, maybe. Ladies and gentlemen, money is constantly evolving and the future may bring new forms of currency and new forms of oppression. We talk about cryptocurrencies. There are some 30,000 types of the market, most of which can be bought with fiat money from their founders. We talk about CBDCs, other formulas that are still far from being called money. There are, however, a few complementary currencies in the world, such as convertible minute, decentralized Romanian-born currency started in Romania. Whatever the forms of currency, its essence, its correct principle of functioning, the economic truth, the scientific truth, this remains universally valid. Money can be a representation of surpluses. Only what is produced as time passed and remains unconsumed can be represented as money. Anything else claiming to be money could only be called pseudo-money. Predictably, as a result of this foray into history, with the punctuation of what money has been and what is become, our followers may ask us, and rightly so, okay, I get it, you're right, but what is the solution, the alternative one, and how we can get to have it? Practically speaking, I honestly believe that unfortunately we can forget about the gold standard. Not that it wasn't good enough, just that it will be extremely difficult to reintroduce it in practice, but it remains a proven preserver of value. Anyway, the gold standard is not the only formula for correcting the monetary disorder into which we have been brought by a system, which do not delude yourself that it will reform from within. It would be to the detriment of its own self-interest. In order to have freedom, the current generation, using technological progress, has to correct exactly the elements that I have been pointing out. The elements have been vitiated by all kinds of trickers throughout history, regardless of the existing political or economic systems. Centralization of the generators of instrument of exchange, which undermined individual and community freedom, the devaluation of the purchasing power of instrument of exchange, determinant of property and polarization, lending without real resources, which leads to waste of natural resources and permanent consumption of working time, crisis and impoverishment of the rich, polarization of people and companies, and tragedies. The possibility for political power to quickly and easily deprive its citizen communities of their own savings and instrument of exchange, virtually luring them into basic slavery in a huge scale relative to those selected to be spoiled with pseudo-money. The bottom line is that the generation of money supply must be predictable, objective, and within the power and at the disposal of each individual human being, people having more or less similar resources, at least over a lifetime, as they did thousands of years ago. The initial distribution of the money supply in the economy is necessary to be equitable during each lifetime, neutral, especially in the context in which the exchange instrument, the monetary representation of something, has no intrinsic use value. The redistribution of money and resources in the economy between people is necessary to take place in a free market in which both the possessor of time resources of the fairly distributed instrument of exchange, its monetary representation, and the possessors of unequally distributed owned real resources, both natural capital, skills, and competencies, but with an objectively measured value. Both categories enter into exchange processes, voluntary cooperation, and fair competition. People to allocate exclusively, voluntarily, exclusively the monetary representation of the resources actually existing to the targeted objectives and to the resource providers they really need, without compulsory contribution for allowances or pensions, contributions that will no longer be needed in the context of gradual, constant, and equal generation for all of the money supply, which will be subject to subsequent voluntary redistribution by each individual. And if people or communities want to hold cash, they should be able to print it at their own cost and thus reducing their electronic balance. This is also possible. As regards the fairness of bearing the common cost in the society, necessary to cover the needs of internal and external security, justice, basic education, and infrastructure, this could be ensured by withholding a minimum amount from each individual, the so-called capital tax, and by a well-calculated individual contribution, also withheld at source, depending on the surplus amount of raw natural resources at one's disposal, the so-called gross natural resource value tax, the land tax, and perhaps possibly according to the surplus waste generated to others by the wear and tear of the elements of own capital resource, own capital owned, and then each to pay per use for the surplus use of the various types of resources at their disposal. We must eliminate the dependence of state income on resource consumption. Thus, I personally, and I don't know if I'm the only one in the world, have come to the conclusion that time, the most valuable resource for the individual, has monetary characteristics, and that the yardstick standard time and its monetary representation, the convertible minute, may be one of the best solutions for people. Therefore, after the book For a Golden Romania, in which I evoked significantly, including the Roman scholar Angel Rugina, the speaker wrote the book Time, Resource and Currency, plus a dissertation paper called Time as a Currency. And I realized from our own resources and a technological platform to support this concept, explained at length on the Minute Bank website, a platform whose growing usefulness for freedom and for offsetting the inequities generated by fiat money purchases of resources, I am personally convinced of. I invite you to analyze it carefully and in detail, and possibly to start using it alternatively, complementarily, and in parallel with the current fiat monetary system. Several hundred people are already doing it, only a few months after each launch. But beyond any past, present, or future project, we are convinced that what is currently being tested in some parts and presented as universal basic income is not a solution. This is not the correct architecture for a universal basic income. The solution to the fairness of a community monetary system, as well as the guarantee of the valorization of people's life, is, on one hand, the recognition of the reality that throughout their existence, members of any community, regardless of its size, make throughout their economic interaction an exchange of time, of resources, of mutual utilities, and the recognition, on the other hand, the practical realization of the need for individuals to retain control over the instrument of exchange, becoming practically the sole generators of the money mass, of the monetary mass, by their very existence, gradually, permanently, proportionally, and at the same time with other people. And we hope that this solution will become as soon as possible, as obvious to as many people as possible, and we really need your active support in this. I'm Octavian Badescu. Thank you for the attention, which with you following, allocating time, this edition of so-called conference lectures from Global News. So thank you for the fact that you paid attention to the authentic and apolitical economic culture program, Economy for All, and see you next time.